Welcome to my channel. My name is Jared, and today we're going to talk about the 356. Okay, so as you can see, I've got the car back on the road. I've actually been driving it a lot lately. I still have a few little things to work out, like I'm still working on tuning the carburetors and just little stuff like that. But overall, the car is running very well. Now, if you saw my last build video, you would have seen that I rebuilt the carbs, I got the engine back in the car, I started it up, and I drove it out of the garage. And that is what happened, but that's not all that happened. So what you didn't see in that video was the first time that I started the car. So I put the engine together, I put it in the car, I started it up, and it started pretty quickly. It ran pretty good. The carburetors did well, the timing was right, the valves were good, a lot of stuff was good, but it had a really bad knock, like a really bad knock. And that is not what you want to hear on a rebuilt engine. So I was able to determine that the knocking sound was coming from one of the cylinder heads. It was not coming from the block, which was very good. It was still surprising that there was any knock at all in the engine. I mean, I saw all the bearings, I checked all the tolerances, I knew everything was fine. I cranked the engine over, many, many times during the process of putting it together to make sure there were no impacts or clearance issues. So everything seemed fine, so it was surprising that it knocked. But when I determined that it was coming from the head, I assumed, okay, it must be something to do with the rocker assembly for the valves. So I checked all the tolerances. And everything was fine on the rocker assembly. I even replaced some of the rocker assembly on that side to see if I could get the sound to go away, and that didn't work. So ultimately, I pulled the engine back out. I pulled the head off, and then what I found was kind of surprising. So the piston, the number one piston, was smacking against the head. So I'd never seen that before. I assumed that there must be something wrong with the head. When I had the heads rebuilt, they resurfaced them. So I thought maybe they've just been resurfaced too many times. Maybe now too much material has been taken off the head and the head sits too low on the engine, and that's allowing the piston to impact that cylinder head. But that wasn't the problem. It turns out I just ordered the wrong pistons. So the pistons that I ordered, when I was shopping for pistons, there's a big price difference. The piston and cylinder set that I bought was around $600 or $700, but they go up to like $3,000 or $4,000. There's multiple different price ranges for different types of pistons for that engine. So the set that I bought, like I said, about $700, it said it was one of the most popular sets that they sell. It was the big bore kit, which is what I wanted. And it was a popular set, so that's pretty much all I paid attention to. I didn't pay that much attention to the compression ratio, which I should have. And then when I went to put the pistons in, I noticed that they were more of a dome-shaped piston. They were not flat, which explains the higher compression rate that they apparently were. And so I believe with those pistons, you would need to be more careful with the tolerances between the piston and the head, and I think you'd have to add shims below the cylinders to provide you the tolerances and the clearance that you need between the piston and the head. And I wasn't aware of that, and I wasn't looking for such a high compression piston. I didn't intentionally order that type of piston. And in the process of trying to track down the knocking sound, I realized that cylinder number 1 didn't seem to be firing, and so I switched out one of the spark plugs that came with the engine into cylinder number 1 instead of the new plugs that I was using. And when I did that and turned it over, the piston in cylinder number 1 impacted that spark plug. And that spark plug was the correct plug for the car, but it was maybe like just where the arch is for the spark little arm on the plug was maybe a 16th, probably less than that, deeper into the engine than on the new plugs that I bought. And that was enough. The piston impacted that spark plug. So at that point, I knew I didn't want to have these pistons in the car. I don't want a situation where putting a set of plugs in the car that are actually correct for the car but aren't the exact tolerance you need could end up with pistons hitting spark plugs and causing all kinds of damage. So I wasn't going to use those pistons. So the brand new set of pistons I bought, I didn't use them. I ended up getting another set of pistons and cylinders, and they are the exact same type that came out of the engine. They're the 4-ring type, which are harder to put in, but they have the flatter top to the piston, and so now there's no concern. So now, of course, the piston doesn't hit the cylinder head anymore, and there's no concern with it ever hitting the spark plugs. So basically, I didn't do enough research, or I didn't understand the differences between the pistons that I bought and the pistons that came out of the engine. In the past with Volkswagen engines, you just buy the big bore kit, you put it in, you're done. It's not quite that simple with these Porsche engines. The details are a little more important, obviously. So anyway, I pulled the engine out, I took off the heads and the cylinders and the pistons, and I replaced the pistons and cylinders and put the heads back on, put it all back together, put it back into the car, and fired it up. And that's what you guys saw in that last build video. So it wasn't quite as simple as the video made it look, but the results are what they are. I mean, what you saw in that video, that's the results. The engine is now in the car. As you can see, it's running fine. I've put a little over 200 miles on the car since I got it back on the road. So everything seems to be good with the engine. I have had a few other small things that I noticed once the car was on the road. Like I mentioned before, typically once you get these things on the road, you're going to find lots of other little things that need to be fixed. And in this case, the tie rod ends were bad. So once I got it on the road, it felt a little loose. The steering didn't feel right. So I checked, and the tie rod ends were going out, and so I replaced all the tie rod ends. So that fixed that. But the car still didn't feel right. It still felt kind of weird on the road. So I started looking into the alignment of the rear wheels. And it turns out that I didn't realize there was supposed to be a shim on the transmission, on the front side of the transmission where the transmission mounts. There are some small shims there. And because this transmission and axle is all one assembly, it's not like the 912s or the 911s where the axles are separate from the transmission, they come off separately. This transmission, because it's all one piece, if you move the transmission forward or backwards, you change the toe in and toe out of the rear wheels. So by not having those shims on the front of the transmission, it was too far forward, and therefore the front of the wheels were too far out. So they were towed out like maybe 1.5 inches. I mean, it was quite a bit. So that was causing the weird feeling that I had when driving it. So once I figured that out, I made some shims for the transmission. I got that all set correctly. Now the back wheels are straight. They're not towed in or out at all, which is the way it's supposed to be. And now it handles great. It drives great. So everything is good on that end. I'm really enjoying the car, and I'm very surprised and pleased with how many things did just work, kind of right out of the gate. I usually expect a lot of things to need to be addressed and adjusted, and on this one it wasn't that bad. I am still adjusting the carburetors. It takes some time to get these carbs tuned just right. I've been playing with the jet sizes a little bit, and right now I did some research and I found out the size of the stock jets, and I put that size in, and that seems to be working the best, but I'm still working on adjusting each carburetor to get them all in tune and get everything set up correctly. So that takes a little while, but it's already running pretty good, and I'll get there eventually. Ooh, got some construction going on here. So, aside from that stuff, things have been going pretty good with the car. I did do a few cosmetic things to it. I added a roof rack, a luggage rack to the back of the car, and I added some driving lights up front. That's pretty much it. Other than that, things are going really good with the car. I do plan on taking this car on a pretty long trip very soon. So I'm going to do what's probably going to be a 4-day trip up the coast. So you can follow me on Instagram if you want to follow along while that trip takes place. And then once I get back within a few weeks, I'll have the video edited and I'll be posting the video of that trip. But you can follow me at J&H Classics on Instagram. I'm easy to find. And then I'll be putting live updates on there as the trip takes place. And then of course, we'll see if I end up with a breakdown situation or something. Maybe the trip won't end up being completed, but there'll at least be some info on Instagram if you want to follow it there. Other news, the transmission in the car. So it had a leak, but I changed to a thicker gear oil. I think what I was using was too thin, and that seems to have stopped the leaks. I'm still not 100% confident in this gearbox. I think I may have to take it out and go back through it again at some point to make sure everything's correct, but it seems to be working fine for now. So yeah, that's pretty much it then. I'll pull over up here and I'll do a quick walk around so you guys can see the outside of the car. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching, guys. I really appreciate it. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing. I also want to give a special shout out to my patrons. You guys are helping fund the channel, and I really appreciate that. And if anybody wants to become a patron, there's a link in the description. Okay, thanks, guys. Bye.